Well, getting the first client or getting any client is not simple. It is not easy. The amount of effort that you need to put in to get a client is definitely no jokes. And when it comes to a startup, it is even more difficult because you do not quite have a very well established track record, or you do not quite have the kind of a brand value that an established player will have. So entrepreneurs do have a tendency to rush into the very first client that they get and try and make it operational. Yes, a good client is rare. A good client, a good paying client, a good paying profitable client sometimes may not be, you know, the best option, or the best case scenario for most startups. So there is something that is amiss, uh, either in terms of payment or in terms of the brand value, so on and so forth. But nevertheless, getting the first client is very important so that you can showcase, do a good job, showcase your services, and acquire more clients. Basically, you start off. That's what it can do. So in a rush to sign up, rush to start work, many entrepreneurs forget the very basics. So they have this long conversations with the client. The client is very keen to start off, and so are you. And then, on a basic verbal understanding across the table, he says, all right, let's start work. And then you start mobilizing your resources. And when you start mobilizing your resources and deploy, and then something goes wrong, and suddenly you are staring down the barrel of a gun with no contract in your hand. So, first and foremost, my friends, sign a contract before you start work. No matter how good the client is, how big the client is, if the contract is taking a long time, well, sign an interim document. But let it be signed between two responsible, authorized people from both your side as well as the client side. I know about this company, been associated with in the past, who did exactly this. And what is surprising is they are not a new company, they're a very established company, but in a rush to get the brand, of the client onto the client list, they started work without signing a contract, without even signing the initial document. As a result, the first almost 16 months of work, the entire project was for about 8.5 years. For the first 16 months, all the expenses, especially on the manpower side and things like that, was never reimbursed because there was no documents available. There was no communication available. The client said, fine, if you are, these are the expenses, this is during the closure. So the fine prints were out, and the client said, okay, fine, if we're going to treat this part as per the current policies, what we said, hey, but that's not what was agreed. And the client turns around and says, can you show me one piece of paper which shows what was agreed at that point in time? Because at that point in time, the people who so-called agreed are no longer in the system. So how do you expect me to go back on this perceived thing? And they were right. And they were so right. So this entire amount of 1.5 crores had to be surrendered, had to be given up, written off. Why? Because there was no documentation. Now, this was an established company, but imagine this happening to a startup. It could be very, very detrimental to the interest of the company. So first and foremost, sign a contract. Let the basic essentials be covered. You may not be able to cover everything. I do agree to that. But at least start. If the contract is taking time and you need to start work, get an initial document signed so that the basic understanding between the two organizations is clear. The other thing that entrepreneurs tend to do copy paste the contract. Let's search the contract maybe on Google if you get, or a similar contract with somebody else, a friend's firm or whatever the case may be, and copy paste that. It's the same service, same everything. So let's do that. Don't. Invest time in your contract. Read through every word, interpret every word the way it can. Look at the worst case scenario. So worst case, if goes wrong, what are my liabilities that come up? What are their liabilities? How much is it enforceable, practical for enforcing? Analyze that before you just simply put it on a Word document and send that email to the client saying, get it vetted by a legal and let's sign up. Because copy paste can hurt. Well, it cost a company $2 lakh because when they copy pasted the contract, they forgot to mention that a certain component of the breakup of a cost was not to be taken off from the margins, which is a fixed margin business, from the margins of the company. The contract that they copy pasted was a fixed margin contract, and every component was predefined, predetermined, including how things are going to be reimbursed. And when it was copy pasted to another contract, a slight variation in the nature of the business with the other client, we had a case where at the end, that is almost 5.5, 6 years after the project started and it was being handed over, he says, oh, no, can't help it. Sorry, it's not in your contract. And that was the time when a lot of fine prints came out. I remember there was a computer cost. I says, hey, you're supposed to reimburse. I said, excuse me, it's not in your contract. And where did that contract come from? Oh, that was copy pasted from the other one. And the company lost money. This is one thing that one of the managers, one of the MDs whom I've learned a lot from, said, if you lose even 1 rupee of revenue, it's a crime. And that's the way you need to approach revenue. Costs, you will get opportunities to save, but revenue opportunities are not that easy to get. So even a rupee of revenue lost is a crime or a revenue opportunity. Here, because of this lack of focus, you simply lost $2 lakh, not small amount. That can be the result of a copy-paste job. So invest your time. Many entrepreneurs do not look at what are the maximum liability that I will accrue in this contract in a worst come worst scenario. We always hope for the best. This will work out, that will work out, and we make our dream palaces on some kind of a tree, and we've already allocated the rooms for what you're going to do. But we do not make a worst come worst analysis. That's very important, because if you don't know what is the maximum payout, so that you can manage your cash flows, you can take care of your liabilities, your business continues, your business doesn't stop. Because as long as things are going fine, things are good. The day it is not, well, you're in a soup and so is everybody else. Startups do have issues on cash flows. They have to struggle to get the cash flows. And these are certain areas which are like insurance policies, which protects your current cash flow and takes care of the liability. These kind of activities are very, 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 very important. Please do the maths when it comes to your contract. I had this great gentleman whom I met in one of the companies which I worked for, and he had signed a huge contract with one of the warehousing companies, and he came back successful, happy. And when the MD sat down saying, all right, this was the same contract yesterday? Yeah, yeah. We made some minor changes, that's about it. So says, okay. And when we actually sat down, and I was part of the MD office at that point in time, kind of surprising. Then HR guy being part of MD office, not very, because I was lucky enough to have that kind of a bent of mind, and I was lucky enough to work under very good MDs who actually taught me things by putting me in the fire. So an HR guy understands this thing, because business is common sense if you really look at it. Coming back, when we did the maths on that contract, we realized the changes that was incorporated could result in a negative profitability. In other words, you're making a loss on the contract. You're not making a profit. The only way that you could have made profit is by really pushing the operations guys to operate the contract profitably. There was no other way. Now here, the sales guy has signed off. He's got his contract signed, margins in place, so on and so forth. But the consequence of it is faced by the operations. And that's one of the areas where contracting goes wrong. If you do not involve operations into contracting, your client transfer, your operating of the contract in a profitable manner does get severely impacted. It is very important. Even if I'm an expert in the business, fine, but every time I do that, I have my ops guys who are also sitting along, no matter how routine it may sound, but it just needs to do. The next thing is that cash is king. Very important. Please emboss this in your office and keep. Cash is king. If you're sitting on a pile of cash, if you have the client's cash with you, you dictate terms. If the client has your cash and you have to recover it from him, he is the king. He is going to dictate terms. So in a closure, there is no love lost, because you know there is no business equation that's going to exist later on. So cash is king. And think about the smaller things, like, should I bill in my contract? I'm talking about contracting. Should I bill before I pay the service? Like, for example, when I'm paying rent, I first pay the rent and then stay. I'm paying it in advance. So similarly to my services, should I first be charging and then doing the providing the service and then settling at the end? Or should I first deliver the service at my own cost? And one of the CEOs actually taught me this. Wherever there is an opportunity to first bill and then provide service is an ideal option. Because in the second case, where you are providing service first and then billing, you are actually funding the client. And that's not the business that you're in. That's clearly not the business that you're in. So if you can, look at first billing and then providing the service. Not always possible, I do agree to that. But wherever you get the opportunity, first approach, keep it, first bill and then provide service. At the end of it, you do a reconciliation. Now, this is where finance comes into play, and it should be part of contract. If it is part of contract, it will happen. Close out the contracts, close out the finances of the month on month, and issue the NDC, no due certificates. Take the NDC from the client. Otherwise, at the end of, like what happened in my case, after 7 years, they were opening up the contracts or the billing we did from the first day, questioning us why was this. And they were well within their rights because we had not signed an NDC. We had not given the NDC. We didn't take an NDC from them. So in the NDC, if there are open items, you can always mention that, okay, rest is closed, these are open. It brings in a lot of clarity. It helps finance, it helps you plan your cash flows, operations, everything. You are that much sure. Not all clients would want to do the NDC. You may not do it monthly, maybe 45 days, maybe once a quarter, but definitely don't do it annually. Do it at a much lower frequency so that in that financial year you have enough time to react to and take corrective measures so that the future business goes well. Second thing on cash flow. What is your product mix? As a logistics company who was our competitor, when the market was down at one point in time, then there was a huge issue on cash flows that almost every logistics company and warehousing company was dealing with. This company was doing pretty well, and that's because of the product mix. They had retail and corporate both available. So retail, the customer would come to the branch, drop in the package, pay the money and go. And then you connect it to your line haul and things like that, and deliver the packet wherever it goes. So here the cash cycle was very low, very short. The corporate cash cycles are long. Now, if you depend completely on the cash cycle, which is long, your funding requirements are different and they are more expensive. When it comes to short cash cycles, like when you go to a restaurant, you go, you eat, you pay, you come back. At best, you pay by a credit card or a debit card, which is settled the very next day. So the restaurant always has the money in hand. It is cash. And cash is king. Similarly, for your business to think through, is there a portfolio mix that I can offer to different client sets? Maybe need not be the same. Can that happen to a retail and a corporate kind of a combination? Can this particular product can have a lower cash cycle, that one can have a higher cash cycle? Can this particular product have, I don't want to throw any jargons of management out here, but I'm trying to just keep it very simple. For this particular product, can I bill first and then deliver? Or do I need to first deliver and then bill? So on and so forth. So that's the product mix and the cash cycle story. Well, all of this is not simple when it comes to a startup. Startups may not have that kind of a leverage with existing brands. I understand that. I completely understand that. But it's very important for the entrepreneur to think on those lines, to be aligned to this entire thing. Because as an entrepreneur, you chose to fly with the eagles. And if you want to fly with the eagles, stop swimming with the ducks.